What is the creepiest, scariest, strangest unexplained story you've had, heard or know? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. When I was in 3rd grade, I slept over at my friend's house, and he had a bed sort of like a bunk bed, but instead of there being a bed at the bottom, he had toys in boxes, etc. Anyway, it was around midnight when I woke up to a tapping sound from under it, and I thought it was him, so I woke him up and said, "Did you hear that?" We both sat up, and the tapping got louder and louder, so I threw a stuffed animal down under the bed, hoping to scare whatever it was off, but instead the stuffed animal was thrown back up at us. We started screaming, and his dad ran in and told us nothing was there and to go to sleep. Eventually, we passed out, and the next morning we found claw marks in the shape of a hand dug into his wall. It still scares the shit out of me just thinking of it. The most scary real experience for me would be the time I was reassured that God exists and was listening to my prayers. I'm not a deeply religious person. I believe and pray every once in a while, but I don't go to church. While back, I was going through a rough time, and so was my family. One night before bed, I decided to pray and simply ask God to watch over my family and me. The next day, I was at work walking past the entrance, and I saw this guy, about the same age as me, come walking through the entrance. This guy walked straight to me without stopping or even glancing at anything else except straight at me. He walked up to me and said, "God has heard your prayers and is watching over you and your family." Then he turned around and walked straight out the entrance. I was speechless. I still, to this day, don't know if this was coincidental or an act of the devil letting me know I was being watched over. It was scary and had me baffled the rest of the night. I was walking down the linear path, Farmington River Canal Trail, in Connecticut with my friends. We did stuff like that a lot. Living in a suburb, there wasn't always any danger as the town pretty much shut down after 8 p.m. It was pitch black out, and we were all pretty creeped out, which is exactly what made it exciting. Adrenaline pumping and all that good stuff. So my friend John turns on his flashlight phone to illuminate the path ahead of us. I was all the way on the left, my friend was next to me, and her boyfriend was next to her. On the right was John with the flashlight. I looked over my left shoulder, and when I turned back to look at my friend, there was a hand between our two faces. It was like a 3-dimensional shadow, completely void of light. I screamed, and we booked it for the rest of the mile down the path. We were walking down the path again a few weeks later. It was the night of the supermoon, and we were doing it again. We hadn't walked down since the last incident, but we figured why not? This time, both I and my friend saw it. A figure, void of light, crouched behind a bench. We haven't walked down that path since. It was just too freaky. When I was really little, maybe 4 or 5, my little sister and I got up before my dad and went downstairs. Something we weren't allowed to do at that time. I remember getting a jar of peanut butter for my little sister, and we sat on the floor and started eating it. I was indeed a shithead. I remember this raspy whispering voice saying help, help, help over and over again. I was so scared that I grabbed my little sister, ran upstairs, and woke up my dad. He went downstairs and checked it out. He said he didn't hear anything, but I could tell he was really freaked out. It's one of my earliest memories, and still to this day I can hear that voice in my head and I get chills. Staying at an older comfort inn just off the strip from Las Vegas. I'm awoken to my phone ringing. It's my mother saying she's sorry she missed my call and asking what I needed. I say I never made any calls. She assures me it's in the caller ID and tells me the time. I asked what the person on the phone wanted, but she didn't get to the phone in time before the machine kicked in. Apparently no message was left either. I'm perplexed as my phone shows no calls made. I don't know why, as I'd normally not care enough to check something so innocuous, but this really bothered me, and I called the phone company to check. A chill runs down my spine as the operator confirms that yes, indeed, a call was placed, and its location was Las Vegas, Nevada. I dog sit as a side gig. One day, I got a call from my client Nick and Josh, and Nick explained to me that Josh had cancer and that the two would be returning home to Australia so that Josh could be with family until the end. I was asked to live at their house and watch Toby, their adorable cockapoo. After about 2 months, I was home, and the chime that notifies you that someone has come through the front door, or garage, went off. I freaked out, knowing the doors were locked, thinking someone had just broken into the house. I searched all rooms and ensured that all doors were locked, but the chime would periodically go off. I told myself that perhaps a battery was dying, despite the fact that the chime would go off at random, intermittent times. The next day, I checked my email and received a note from Nick letting me know that Josh had passed away the night before, surrounded by loved ones and family. The door chimes worked perfectly from that point on. I believe it was Josh coming home one more time. One night, my friend and I were playing basketball at around midnight. What was the topic we were discussing at the time? The existence of aliens. We were playing around and just practicing layups when a bright blue flash of light came from behind us. This flash was one of the brightest things I'd ever seen. It flooded the entire basketball court and surrounding areas in blue light. It surprised both of us, and we both turned to look at what the source of the light was. I know this is going to sound absolutely insane, but it was a small, round metal floating orb with what looked like a camera lens on the front, sort of like Guilty Spark from Halo. The orb emitted one more blinding bright blue flash of light while we looked at it, and then it floated behind a building out of sight. My friend and I took off after the orb, which, in hindsight, was probably a bad idea. We were able to catch up with it just in time to see the orb float off into the sky away from us at a leisurely pace, then disappear out of view once it had floated high enough that we could no longer see it. For the purposes of disclosure, both of us were sober. In fact, we were straight edge at the time. Neither of us had been doing drugs or drinking for months prior to this incident. Both of us turned at the exact same moment and asked each other, "What was that flash?" So it wasn't as if one of us had a hallucination and the other simply played along. Freaky stuff. When I was very young, I had an imaginary person who I called the Man. I was very young at the time, and I don't really remember this time in my life. Basically, he was this imaginary older man who would just kind of hang out with me, usually at night. My mom would be putting me to bed, and my dad would be out of town on business. I would just keep telling her, "Mom, the man won't let me go to sleep. Mom, don't you see him? Mom, he is touching you right now. Tell him he needs to leave so I can go to bed," etc. She would literally have to walk this man to the end of the driveway. He never tried to hurt me or anything, he would just kind of be there. It didn't help, I had huge sleepwalking problems as well. My parents found me outside a couple times just walking around with the man. Eventually, I just stopped bringing it up. There's a small graveyard near my home in Michigan. About 2 years ago, a group of my friends and I went ghost hunting there. It was a warm night with clear skies, and I was raring to catch a ghost on my friend's camera or tape recorder. Even a cell phone video would do. The cemetery is less than an acre, so it didn't take long to scope it out. We broke into groups of 2 and 3 and traversed the grounds. I wandered with a few people, changing from group to group. I felt restless. Usually, when we were ghost hunting, we cracked wise, but nobody was saying much. A group near a tall monument, at least 7 feet high and shrouded in vines, called us over. There seemed to be a cold spot about the size and shape of a very tall man. I waved my hands through the air. It did feel a bit cooler, but that could have been my imagination. Everyone began taking pictures, claiming they could see a figure in the digital photos. I hung near the back of the group, not seeing anything. I still felt disquieted. I didn't want to be here. That was when a cold shock squeezed my hand, right between the web of flesh between my right thumb and forefinger. I cried out, yanking my hand away. It hurt. The cold radiated slowly off my hand, and I retreated towards the gate. "I'm out." Something grabbed me. "I'm out." I was quickly followed by the rest of the party, not so much because of my encounter, but no one wanted to be in there anymore. It wasn't until the morning that the bruise showed up. Deep in the meat of my hand, not a bad bruise, not bad enough to turn black and blue, but definitely there. Yellow and painful, right in the spot where I'd been grabbed by that cold hand. I haven't been back. When I was about 5, every few weeks at random times at night, I would see a black cat run across whatever room I was in and disappear. I thought it was maybe just my imagination. 12 years later, I was talking to my mom, and she told me about how the lady who used to live above us hated her. She once put something under our doorstep. It was some kind of ritual thing. It causes the family and the household to argue nonstop. My parents argued for weeks until my mom washed the doorstep. One night, my mom was talking to the mother of the lady upstairs. She told my mom that her daughter is heavily into witchcraft, can take her spirit to other places when she falls asleep, out-of-body experience, and can shapeshift into a cat. I thought the story was stupid and possibly fake until her mother said she usually takes the form of a cat. Okay. Here it goes. In school, there used to be this boy called Alistair who was really weird. He lived in a house 5 doors down from me and was new to the area when this all happened. He was really shy and had 0 friends. He was probably the most intelligent person I've ever met, but I'd occasionally go over to his house and play video games while our parents talked. Alistair had a really dark vibe that wasn't normal. His room was full of those creepy drawings of faces and fires with incredible detail. He asked me to play the staring game with him. I started to stare at him, but he laughed and said, "Not that one," confused. I followed him up to the attic, where he immediately drew a white circle on the floor in chalk. It looked like he'd done this before with his immense focus. He sat perfectly in the circle and told me to be silent and to hold his hand. He stared into my eyes with intense coziness and gestured for me to do the same. I sat there staring into his eyes before he broke into a smile and shook my head from side to side, then grabbed my chin and tilted my head upwards. To my absolute fucking horror, there was a tall woman standing behind him, staring directly at my face and smiling, the scariest fucking smile I'd ever seen. I looked back at Alistair in terror, where he smiled and said, "Can you see it?" I screamed yes. Almost in tears, and he rolled away from the circle, and she was gone. I was crying immensely and had a huge feeling of dread as I walked downstairs. Alistair's mom smacked him and said, "Don't you fucking dare play that game again," knowing full well what had just happened. I ran home and cried. I spoke to Alistair the next day at school, and he told me that she doesn't always go away. I just can't. Something strange used to happen to me that I can only rationalize as sleep paralysis because I don't know what else it could have been. When I was really young, 4 to 6, I would sleep on the top bunk in mine and my brother's bunk bed, and several times I remember waking up with a start, sitting straight up, and seeing a puppet, a human Muppet-looking female puppet with yarn pigtails, hanging upside down with her waist kind of cut off and flush with the ceiling. Every time this happened, the puppet would be facing away from me, but upon realizing I was looking at it, it would turn around, still upside down, look at me, and laugh really loud and obnoxiously. I would always run out of the room to sleep with my parents, and I remember telling them about it, but they would, of course, say I was just dreaming. To this day, I am certain I was not asleep when this happened. I don't know what it could have been or if it was something similar to sleep paralysis, without the paralysis. But it still creeps me out thinking about it. A friend of my father's mother had passed away, and the family met at his house after the funeral. They had a woman who came to their house to clean once a week, and this happened to be that day. Most of the family had been in the kitchen when this woman came down from the second-floor bedroom, entered, and gave her condolences to the family. She proceeded to tell them that she just spoke with the grandfather, husband of the deceased, about what a great woman she was, and he shared all sorts of stories with her. Confused about the situation, the family asks her to describe him to them. The woman, not thinking anything was strange, describes him exactly, even down to the way he spoke and some of the stories they spoke about. They then tell her that he passed away 15 years ago, and there is no way she could have possibly spoken to him. To this day, they have no idea how she knew what she did. This happened to me about 6 years ago, in my very early 20s. I was living with my grandparents as I had just broken up with my ex and was waiting for my new condo to be ready, so it was a transition phase for me. This was the second time I lived with them. I stayed with them when I first moved to the city where I, and they, currently live. Hey, free rent, and it was the first time away from my parents, and I was young, so I guess they could keep an eye on me. Anyway, my grandparents had an awesome dog named Nikki. She was a border collie lab cross and just the sweetest dog. When I lived with them the first time around, she always used to burst into my bedroom in the middle of the night to make sure I was okay. She loudly banged open my closed door to get into my room. This would obviously wake me up, as it was a loud bang whenever she did it. I would give her a pet, and she would fall asleep on the other bed beside me, 2 twin beds. My mom and her sister used the room when they were kids. Fast forward a couple years, and I'm living with my grandparents again, but Nikki passed away about a year earlier. At old age, she got sick. Sad, we all missed her. One night I was dead asleep in the same room I slept in before, and I got woken up by a loud bang and my door being opened, just like Nikki did. It freaked me out, but I managed to convince myself I was dreaming or something and went back to sleep. In the morning, when I got up, my door was actually open, although my grandmother had closed it a bit to give me some privacy. I usually always sleep with my door closed, so that was unusual. Still, maybe I was dreaming, right? What sealed the deal for me is that a couple days later, both my grandparents, who slept in separate bedrooms, were talking to me and asked if the other night I heard Nikki barking outside. They both heard her barking at night. She had a distinctively loud bark and loved to stay outside, even in the dead of winter. So you could hear her bark from inside the house, especially from the bedrooms my grandparents were in as they backed onto the backyard. The night in question was the same night my door got flung open. I can't explain it, I don't know what it was to this day. We eventually told the rest of the family, but of course, they didn't believe us. One time when I was in 6th grade, I was getting ready for school in the morning. I remember getting breakfast and sitting down at the kitchen table. I heard footsteps going down to the basement. At first, I thought it was my dad because usually he would wake up to me going downstairs. But I heard my dad's loud snoring from the bedroom. So I go to the basement and investigate. From the corner of my eye, I saw someone walking towards the door that led to the garage. As soon as I turned to the door, I heard someone moving. So I called out my dad's name just to make sure if it was him, but he didn't reply. So I walked in the garage, and I saw what looked like a man wearing a top hat. But the weird thing was that it was a figure all in black, like a shadow. There was nothing that described his facial features or what ethnicity he was, but he was just all black, not to be confused with a black person. So I ran back upstairs and went to my parents' room. I found my dad in the room and told him to wake up because I saw someone in the garage. He got his baseball bat, and we both ran charging into the garage, but no one was there. To this day, I have no idea exactly what I saw, but I remember researching and finding out that other people had seen something similar to what I saw. They call them shadow people. When I was little, in our old house, my brother once had a fever. It was severe, around 41 degrees Celsius. Now before I write this, you know those experiences or that experience you had when you were little, that even though it may have been a long, long time ago, you still remember it with crystal clear clarity? No? Well, that is certainly the case here, and I find it seriously freaky for some reason. So, I woke up because I heard a loud noise, mostly just the end of it, which I can best describe as my brother screaming or yelling. So I went out of bed and saw him twitching around in his own bed and waving his arms as he was trying to get something off his body. I thought he had some kind of delirium going on and shook him, telling him, "Nothing is there, be calm." Now, that's not really weird, but after that, let me tell you, I remember going to bed again and sleeping without any problems. As I woke up, I made my brother a nice breakfast to make him feel better and brought it up to him on the bed. I asked something like, "Why did you shake so violently this night? Delirium, right?" My brother said that it was exactly that, and that he thought there were loads of spiders crawling swiftly back and forth on his stomach just so he could see it but not do anything about it. But he said it was easy to calm down after that. But then I told him I calmed him down, so that wouldn't be surprising. He then said he didn't know what I was talking about. He said that during and some moments after the delirium, I was just standing there, looking at him, not even touching him. If that was also in that fantasy of his that night, I can't help but find the entire thing creepy as fuck. In my 20s, my friend was living in her grandmother's house because her grandmother had recently been put into a nursing home, and their family wanted someone to stay in the house in the meantime. I eventually moved in at some point for about 6 months as a roommate with my friend and her boyfriend. It was a pretty old 2-story house and was just one of those houses that had an overall creepy feeling to it. The kind of house that you're never entirely comfortable being alone in which I was quite often as my friend and her boyfriend would follow the Grateful Dead a lot at the time and I would stay behind and watch her dog while she was gone. The house also had this dark and cluttered basement that you could easily access from the outside and had no lock on the inside door leading up to the living room. There were also these weirdly cut and painted funhouse type doors scattered around the basement that her late grandfather had built at some point for reasons I don't know that added to the creepiness of it. The living areas of the house were also notorious for being infested with those bushy, many-legged centipede-type bugs that you'd occasionally find crawling across your bed. It was a clean house, but those fuckers were everywhere. I never felt comfortable there by myself, and having the dog didn't help, as he would do that thing dogs do and just stand still and stare at the corner of the room, a door, or a window at nothing at all for a long time. Now I'm equal parts a believer in the paranormal as well as a skeptic, and I know things like the creepiness factor and the dog staring at nothing could easily be explained logically, but one night I easily had one of my more believable experiences in life. The upstairs of the house was simple in design. You went up a long, straight flight of carpeted steps, and at the top were immediately 3 rooms. The one on the right was my friend's bedroom, the one on the left was my bedroom, and in the middle was a smallish bathroom. There was hardly any landing at the top of the stairs. Just the 3 separate doorways when you got to the top. So it's a night that I'm home alone all night by myself without the dog this time, and I go to bed. I'm the type of person who sleeps with her door closed, even when she's by herself. So I'm lying in bed, and a short while later I hear the bottom stair on the riser creak, followed by the next stair, and so on. Now you could easily explain this away as the house settling or making house noises or whatever, which is what I was telling myself at the time, but no, these were distinctly the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. I heard them slowly come all the way to the top, 1 step at a time, in succession, and stop right outside my bedroom door. Needless to say, I was quietly freaking out, whether it was paranormal or not. I just laid in bed, not knowing what to do or what was going to happen, and not wanting to end the story in an anticlimactic manner, but nothing is exactly what happened. Just silence. I stayed under the covers the rest of the night and didn't open that door until daylight, where I, of course, found nothing. Like I said, I'm equal parts believer and skeptic, but almost 20 years later, I can still remember that incident clearly, and I have no doubt that what I heard were footsteps coming up those stairs and stopping outside my door. I'll just never know what caused them. When I was 7 years old, we lived in a place called Dundrum, County Down, in Ireland. I had never experienced anything ghostly, though, at 7, I was afraid of just about everything. One night I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. I was lying on my back with my arms folded across my chest and the duvet up to my chin. The bed faced a small window in what we call the box room. It was around 8 feet by 6 feet. As I was trying to sleep, I felt a gust. I opened my eyes in time to see the curtains falling back into place. I got up from my bed to close the window. It opened out at the top, while the bottom was a fixed sheet of glass. I stood back, thinking how strange it was that the window was closed. I lay in bed occasionally peeking at the curtains, and when nothing had happened for a while, I felt comfortable enough to keep my eyes closed. To my horror, I felt a huge gush. The curtains were nearly touching the ceiling. I lay there frozen, and I swear I wish this was all lies. The ugliest, most tatty, dressed in white bitch swept straight through the glass and hovered a couple of feet above my bed, staring at me. I tried to get up to run to my parents' room, but the ugly old bitch was tightening the duvet around my neck. I struggled with all of my might with my eyes closed, and when somehow I managed to break free, I bolted down the hall and freaked out, waking my parents. My father was a very strict man. He told me to grow up and marched me back to my room. I sat upright in the bed the rest of the night with the duvet over my head, sitting in a puddle of my own piss. If I could just remain silent, maybe the old woman would not hear me. I am 38 now, and in my children's lives, I have never and will never sleep with my bed facing a window. My wife knows why, as there is nothing I have not confided in her. Over the years, I have heard of a condition known as old Hag Syndrome. Even if that is what it was, it is no less terrifying to a 7-year-old. A few days after this horrific experience, my parents had a bad car crash when an oncoming speeding car hit black ice on a country road. My parents survived the collision, but my father was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I wonder if it was an omen and the banshee had sent a warning. I feel myself returning to that petrified 7-year-old and consoling him in my mind. Surely she will not return, right? Back in 2003-04 I was a senior in high school, and I lived with my mom. It was probably around springtime, and one Friday night I went out with some friends and a boyfriend to see a movie. My mom was using a stepladder and doing some minor paint touch-ups in the kitchen when I let her know I was about to take off. She was coming down from the ladder and was complaining about how she felt some tightness in her chest, and she was going to take a break from painting. No big deal. My mom was 50, so I figured she needed a break. Or a cigarette. After making sure she was okay, it was off to the movies. I come home later that night to my mom hysterical on the phone, and she tells me how my uncle, her brother, had just died en route to the hospital due to a severe heart attack. He was more than likely having a heart attack at the very time my mom had those sharp chest pains. She's never had pain like that before or since. Her and her brother were always super close, and she insists that she felt his passing and that she could feel the pain and sheer terror that he felt as he was dying. And then the comforting feeling as he passed. Since my uncle's death, she still claims she sees him in her dreams and communicates with him. I'm not saying I believe or don't believe, but I do know that the night he passed away, she felt something, and there was no way to fake it. Maybe just a coincidence, but still quite crazy.